Hello, American History 2 students. This is Mr. Bell with your lesson for day 143 of 180 of school. This is Wednesday, April 8th, 2020, which is day 17 of the COVID-19 shutdown. So what we're going to do today, we're going to go over a warm-up, then we're going to do a watch-along for the Scopes trial reading activity, which you can access on YouTube, and of course, like all these other things, on Canvas. So let's go ahead and get into the warm-up for today. What was the result of the Scopes trial? That creationism would be taught in the school systems in Tennessee, but the overall result was that it began the discussion of whether or not evolution should be taught in schools. So while Scopes kind of loses the battle there in Tennessee, he wins the war because evolution, not creationism, is taught in schools now. Who was the kingfish? That was Huey Long. He was the socialist governor of Louisiana who came up with the Share Our Wealth program, and he was assassinated. What was the CCC program of the New Deal? Civilian Conservation Corps, and what that did was it put people to work building infrastructure. What president came up with the New Deal, and what was it? Of course, that was FDR. It was the plan to get America out of the Great Depression, or the set of plans. So the first one is creationism would be taught in Tennessee. The second one is he was the socialist governor of Louisiana, Huey Long. The next one, CCC, is the Civilian Conservation Corps. It said that you would put workers to work who were unemployed, so people who had lost their jobs and then were living in places like Hooverville, doing blue-collar jobs, rebuilding infrastructure as part of the WPA and PWA that we talked about earlier this week. What president came up with the New Deal? Of course, that was FDR. It was the set of plans like Social Security and the SEC to pull America out of the Great Depression. So let's go ahead and get into our reading activity for today. Let me pull that up. This is the Scopes trial. So let's just pull Scopes back up here. If you remember kind of the background on what went on, Scopes was kind of led into going into a school in Tennessee, teaching biology, and he was actually a math teacher, so he kind of swindled his way into this biology job, and he wanted to create a fuss. And he took the offer to go into the Tennessee public schools and teach evolution, which is this idea of the Big Bang, so Darwinism, things of that nature, and to denounce creationism. He was fired immediately. He sued. It went to a Tennessee state court. The Tennessee state court ruled against him, and creationism was taught in schools in Tennessee for a long time. But eventually, because of separation of church and state, freedom of religion, equal protection, the Equal Protection Clause, the Establishment Clause, all those things, it was banned in schools as far as teaching from a religious perspective in a public school. And now evolution is what is taught. So let's get into the background with this reading activity on the Scopes trial. I'm going to read this through with you like I would in class, and then I will give you some abbreviated questions to answer toward the end. And this is your second and final reading activity of the week, and your last work that is required as part of the requirements before spring break, which is next week. So let's go ahead and get into this. So let me pull back up that reading activity, and here we go. Without a doubt, the question, where do humans come from, of course we're right here, was asked long before Charles Darwin published Origin of Species in 1859. That is his works that lays out the Big Bang and how Earth and the universe was created. No mention of God in there. Yet throughout the 20th century and into the 21st century, the debate amongst members of the scientific and religious communities has continued to be a divisive and widely debated topic. The Scopes monkey trial, again we're talking about monkeys here as humans were derived from apes in Darwin's theory of evolution, is perhaps one of the most critical events of this controversy and one of the landmark legal decisions of the 20th century. This is up there with like the O.J. Simpson trial as far as important court cases that were not Supreme Court cases and kind of captivated the nation. Let's go to pre-trial. The Butler Act. In 1859, English naturalist Charles Darwin published The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. This was a collection of scientific evidence that supported the theory of evolution. Darwin's theory was seen by many fundamentalists as a challenge to the biblical story of creation. The controversy over the theory came to head in March of 1925 with the passage of the Butler Act. It prohibited the teaching of evolution in any Tennessee school receiving public educational funding from state government. So here with the Butler Act, what they're doing is they're banning the teaching of evolution in Tennessee schools. The state of Tennessee versus John Thomas Scopes, commonly referred to as the Monkey Trial, was intended to accomplish two goals. One, challenge the Butler Act, which made it the teaching of the theory of evolution illegal in Tennessee schools, and to draw commercial attention to the small town of Dayton in Ray County. In 1925, the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, advertised in a Chattanooga newspaper. The ACLU is a legal group that represents more liberal, socialist types of people and groups. And they also do a lot of good work because they represent people who have been discriminated against for things other than race. Although they can deal with race, the NAACP handles that mostly when you're talking about the African American community. Of course, we discuss the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People already. So we're picking up here. In a Chattanooga newspaper for a teacher who was willing to challenge the act in court. Community leaders in Dayton saw the opportunity for publicity and convinced local teacher John T. Scopes to accept the ACLU offer, offering an opportunity for two of the era's most prominent legal minds to face off against each other in court. And we'll talk about who that is in a minute. The trial became a media circus, attracting attention from all over the world. So here's the small town of Dayton, Tennessee. Ray County is a rural county, probably more rural than Cleveland County. And it is the center of the nation's attention as far as newspapers and the media, the radio at this time, be radio and newspapers who are covering this trial. And this is probably going to set the course for what is going to be taught in schools all over the country, because if evolution ends up being taught in Tennessee, then it will probably end up being taught everywhere. So let's go to what's called the Dayton Challenge. Next section here. On May 4th, 1925, the ACLU made an offer in the Chattanooga Daily Times to finance a test case challenging the Butler Act. Community leaders in Dayton were quick to respond. George Rapala, head of the Cumberland Coal and Iron Company, arranged for a meeting in Robinson's drugstore the very next day. Present were Walter White, not of Breaking Bad fame, County Superintendent of Schools, Frank Robinson, owner of the store, head of the County Board of Education, and two local lawyers, Sue Hicks, a man named after his mother. It's important they point that out. His name's Sue, and Wallace Haggard. After being turned down by the regular high school science teacher, a group sent for 24-year-old John T. Scopes, who had just completed his first year of teaching math, physics, and chemistry, but not biology, which is where evolution is taught. Scopes did not recall teaching the theory of evolution, but agreed to help the case. So here you have a group of lawyers, the ACLU, recruiting somebody in the newspaper to rile things up in the state of Tennessee, which is a very religious state. It says they're meeting in a drugstore. This isn't like CVS or Walgreens now. Drugstores back in this time were places that had a section to pick up prescriptions and medicine, but they also had a section that had a lot of times food and drink, magazines, comic books, things of that nature. It was almost a hangout spot for young people and people who were older as well. Scopes did not recall teaching the theory of evolution, but agreed to take the case. Scopes was arrested on May 9th and released immediately on bond. After a grand jury indictment on May 25th, Tennessee versus John T. Scopes was scheduled for July 10th, 1925. The plan to bring the trial to Dayton was hatched at the table in the picture where members of the school board met with John T. Scopes. Shown were George Rapala, Walter White, Clay Green, Robinson, and Owen Wasson. Bryan and Darrow were powerful, and we've talked about William Jennings Bryan already, who's about to come up. If you remember, he was the face of the populist movement, created the Populist Party, ran for president as a populist and lost, then ran for president as a Democrat and lost. Bryan and Darrow were powerful speakers and longtime adversaries, so the trial was bound to be dramatic. William Jennings Bryan, a three-time candidate for president, served in the U.S. House, was a former Secretary of State. Darrow was a high-profile defense attorney. So Darrow is defending, just to set the stage for you, Darrow is defending John T. Scopes and his teaching of evolution, where William Jennings Bryan is trying to prosecute him on behalf of the state of Tennessee. He had one victory in a number of capital cases. That's where the sentence would have been death. The Scopes trial, which was not going to be the case here, just to clarify. The Scopes trial quickly became a contest between the concepts of creationism, evolution, or more simply, religion versus science, which is still a debate to this day among many people. Let's get to the trial. On day 7, we're kind of skipping ahead here, the July heat was sweltering in the courtroom. The trial was ordered outside. Darrow, ever the dramatist, made the unusual move of calling Bryan to the stand. You're usually not going to call someone who you are representing in defense to the witness stand. You usually would ask them to plead the fifth, which means, protection against self-incrimination, not having to testify against oneself. By questioning Bryan directly in court, Darrow controlled the line of questioning and managed to define the defense's arguments. Though the testimony was later stricken from the record, Darrow was able to broadcast the theory of evolution to a national radio audience. So here you see he's getting his message out there. Bryan never got to the opportunity to make a grand summation since Darrow challenged his client's plea to guilty the following day. Changed his client's plea to guilty. The whole purpose of this trial isn't to prove him as innocent. Bottom line, he taught evolution in school, so according to the Dayton Act, he broke Tennessee law. That being said, the point of getting this trial and making it this public spectacle is to bring attention to the theory of evolution and whether or not it should be taught in schools. Dayton reveled in the publicity that came with the trial of the century. Charles Darwin had theorized that only man and apes had a common ancestor, and that man had descended from apes. The popular misconception gave rise to a flurry of monkey-themed songs, dolls, and souvenirs. The Dayton Hotel placed a gorilla display in this lobby and trained a chimpanzee named Joe Mindy, who entertained spectators around the world. Book, food, and souvenir vendors vied for the local clergy, and itinerant preachers for space outside the courtroom. So to paint a picture, you have all types of merchandise being sold outside of the courtroom and throughout Dayton, usually primate themed. You have all kinds of preachers traveling there to preach against evolution. So what you have is a media circus, and almost a literal one, with the chimpanzee who you were being charged to meet and take pictures with, Joe Mindy. So what happened? Aftermath. Scopes was found guilty and fined $1,000 for violating the Butler Act. Despite the media hype, the verdict was something of an anticlimax, and the monkey trial began to fade into relative obscurity. In a sense, both sides won. The jury sided with Bryan, but Darrow managed to bring widespread attention to the theory of evolution. Fascination with the trial and its central issue continued unabated for decades. Inherent the Wind, a drama based on the trial, premiered on Broadway in 1955. It brought new life to the controversy. The film version, starring Spencer Tracy and Frederick March, opened to movie audiences in 1960. So let's kind of look at the players here that we just talked about. The appeal. The Tennessee Supreme Court narrowly upheld the constitutionality of the Butler Act in 1927, but reversed Scopes' sentence on the technicality. The repeal. 4 decades after Scopes' trial, the Tennessee General Assembly repealed the Butler Act, allowing teachers to introduce evolution as a legitimate science theory. So here, in the end, he's getting what he wants, John T. Scopes and the ACLU. The town, Dayton and Ray County, quietly returned to a normal life once the Bible salesmen, protesters, souvenir hawkers, and reporters left. Tourists and curiosity seekers still visit the town in East Tennessee that was the site of a national debate 80 years ago. The prosecution. William Jennings Bryan, the great commoner, died of a stroke in Dayton only 5 days after Scopes was found guilty. So this was the last big thing in a life full of prominent things that William Jennings Bryan would do. The stress of the trial, the excessive heat, and a history of diabetes probably contributed to his death. Bryan College, a Christian liberal arts school in Dayton, is named in his honor. The defense. Clarence Darrow appealed the case to the Tennessee Supreme Court, but largely withdrew from public life after the Scopes trial. He published his autobiography in 1932 and died 6 years later at the ripe old age of 80. The defendant, John T. Scopes, never comfortable in the limelight, left teaching altogether. After completing a master's degree, he became a professional geologist and worked in the oil industry. He lived to see the Butler Act repealed and died in 1970, so he sees the fruits of his labor. The star, Joe Mindy, the chimpanzee, disappeared from the record. It is likely that he would have denied relationship to any of the humans in the Scopes monkey trial. So let's go to the questions. What was the Butler Act? What was the Dayton Challenge? And what was the verdict of John T. Scopes? So if you watch this, I'm going to allow you to skip number 2, and I'm going to give you the answer to number 1. The Butler Act, before the Scopes trial, prohibited the teaching of evolution in Tennessee public schools. So all you have to do here, if you watch this video, is answer number 3. That's going to be it for this watch along. I hope you've enjoyed this and got something out of this lesson. If you have any questions about this reading activity, the Scopes trial, or any of Unit 4, please feel free to email me at bsbell@clevelandcountyschools.org. Thank you. Stay safe.